Welcome everyone to the Cosmic Matrix podcast with your hosts Bernhard Gunther and Laura Matsu. Today's episode will be about medicine plants, psychedelics, and chasing peak experiences. First of all, a little disclaimer before we start. Laura and I will be sharing some of our personal experiences and tie them into bigger picture topics, just such as the path towards awakening and hyperdimensional realities. But we also want to emphasize that we're not telling anybody what they should or shouldn't be doing. And we both have experienced, positive and negative sides of working with these tools. And there are, many things to consider. And in the end, it all depends on the individual. Some of what we're going to talk about is also based on some of a couple of articles actually have written exactly on this topic. The first one was in 2013 called Reflections on Ayahuasca, Psychedelics, Marijuana, and the Critical Look at the Psychedelic Movement, and an article I wrote last year called Altered States of Entrapment, the Plant Medicine Manipulation.
Yeah, and I would also like to say my own disclaimer that I am also neither for or against using psychedelics. I also acknowledge that in some of the stories, I took them very dangerously, meaning I just bought them off random people and I didn't know if they were pure or not. So I think just to bring that to attention, that no matter what my experience was, is that I acknowledge that I did them in a quite dangerous setting. So I definitely wouldn't recommend that anyone who feels inspired by my own story, if that happens, to do as I did in that sense. Because I even looking back, I would never have done it now from the level of being I'm at. But yeah, so let's just get right into it. So I think the first kind of idea to get into is, obviously today, there's been a lot of attention on psychedelics, using them as an alternative form of medicine. I know there's a psychiatrist in Canada, for instance, that can now legally prescribe ketamine and psilocybin, magic mushrooms, to people who are more severe cases. And you just see in general, like, it's all over the place. Like, even back, in 2011, 2012, when I was really actually it was a bit before that, when I was focusing on it, I know that you focused on some of these psychedelics even way before I did. It still was kind of seen as like a little bit edgy and kind of weird, and you'd be judged for it. But now it seems to be a lot more mainstream and socially acceptable. And I think that's for a reason, is because there's a lot of healing potential in psychedelics, but then you're also getting into the danger of people who chase these peak experiences in general, who always want to feel like this supreme spiritual state. And I guess the danger in that is that it doesn't actually help the soul evolve spiritually in a more organic and grounded way. So maybe we can just get into some of our experiences to start out with. Let's just start where you began. Like, what was your first kind of like major psychedelic? Maybe not even counting marijuana, just to begin with, because everyone kind of smoked a joint when they were a teenager. But just your major kind of psychedelic experience, and like, how did that affect you?
Yeah, well, on that note, actually, I didn't do any drugs or any marijuana. I smoked my first joint at the age of 20. But by the age of 26, I've done everything under the moon, so to speak. In terms of personal experiences, referring to what you said at the beginning, I think most people back then, most kids get into these substances, let's call them psychedelics. And when we talk about psychedelics, medicine plants, generally speaking, we talk about, as you mentioned, psilocybin mushrooms, magic mushrooms, or acid, LSD, DMT.
And we're also going to include ketamine, even though I don't, that's obviously synthetically created for the most part. So we're also going to include that, even though I don't necessarily categorize that as a psychedelic, even though it has psychoactive properties.
It does, yeah. John Lilly's work and all of that. Yeah, that would be good to get into that as well. But yeah, my first experiences were probably in the first time I came across psilocybin mushrooms. And that was actually quite an initiation for me. That was in 1995 or 1996. I can't remember, one of those 2 years. And, through friends, back in the days, I was living in Hollywood being a musician, and we had this circle of friends, Europeans, and we kind of organized these desert parties, illegal desert parties back in the days. It was even way before Burning Man, and just 50 of us getting together once a month out in the desert at a full moon. And, we would get the directions the night before, and we would just rave out in the desert. That was my introduction to electronic music. It was beautiful to camp out in the desert. And, the drug of choice was there mostly back then, ecstasy, MDMA, acid, and mushrooms. And that's when I had also my first mushroom experience out in the desert. And that was really, really profound, especially expensive music, especially experiencing out in the desert in nature. And it really had my first breakthrough, I ate a whole eighth, like about 3.5 grams. And after going through the initial sickness in your tummy and whatnot, I had really this profound experience of really the peak experience you were hinting at, of like experiencing something larger than myself, connected to something bigger, connected to everything that is, and this joy and this bliss. And I was dancing like crazy, locked into the music, and I'm a drummer, so I was playing drums and all of that. So it really connected me to something beyond my little ego shell, right? And, at the same time, I had also this, what came up for me in these experiences as well, of a lot of childhood experiences, even my childhood wounding from my parents and all of that. So I was able to see it from a higher picture perspective, even a lot of compassion for my parents. So it helped me in a certain healing way. And it was also somewhat in my introduction actually to body work, massage, and yoga, because I actually met my mentor out there in the desert. We were both tripping on mushrooms, and the next day he was giving me my first full body massage out in the desert. He has his massage table there, and I was still tripping on mushroom. I had this profound experience of really experiencing my body. I knew the body is just energy condensed to low vibration, right? And I also realized on an experiential level that memories and trauma is stored in my tissue and body. When he was working on me and working on the tension in my body, targeting certain muscles, I had flashbacks to childhood, right? And certain emotions came up and feelings. So I really understood also the body-mind connection and all of that. And it was extremely profound and very healing, right? And there's also my introduction somewhat to yoga, to work, with these poses. I almost did these poses involuntarily before I even understood asana practices of yoga. I did many of these, the classical poses under the influence of mushrooms, because it just felt right, because then energy was moving in my body in a certain way. So, but then also early on, I used it like many kids back then, or even nowadays, you come across these substances through partying, at parties and raves and all of that. But I also noticed early on that there's more to it. So I then also started experimenting by myself, and I got into Terence McKenna and did the heroic dose of 5 grams or even up to 7-8 grams by myself, locked myself in the rehearsal room of my band back then with music, and pushed myself really far out there. And, these are very, it was very experiential. And I was also kind of like, try to get as close to death as possible, so to speak. But, as healing and insightful they were on so many levels, but at some point I also realized too much stuff came up too fast, and I was not able to integrate these experiences. And I feel that's a problem a lot in this day and age, the integration process, when you have such a profound experience.
Yeah, it's interesting because you came at it a very different angle, but kind of much of the same, maybe unconscious intention. I think you really wanted to feel better and maybe didn't even realize how bad you were feeling. I don't even remember I don't even remember the first time I did mushrooms, because I grew up in a town that was kind of like drink and smoke weed and do mushrooms. So I definitely experimented with it way before 20. By 20, I had already been recovering from my first couple drug addictions. So But that was actually what introduced me to ketamine. Was the first thing I had a very profound experience and connection with, because I had been experiencing very severe depression since I was maybe like 14, I would say 15 for sure. And I had developed a cocaine addiction when I was in my late teens. And that basically destroyed my serotonin. But I just really wanted to feel better and feel happier. And they kept prescribing me, meaning psychiatrists, kept prescribing me antidepressants. And, I just never liked them and how they made me feel. And then one day when I was in a dirty rave, like a warehouse, I was in the bathroom with somebody and I thought they were giving me cocaine, and they actually gave me ketamine. And I was like, all of a sudden, it was like, oh my God, the second that I snorted it, I was like, this is exactly what I've been trying to feel. And it just gave me an immediate sense of relief from like all my depressions and all my problems. And looking back, the reason that it did that is because it actually took me out of body. And that's why I liked it. Like all the trauma was in my body. And then I was able to touch something beyond myself, and feel better. And so because I was also caught in very addictive patterns back then, I immediately got addicted to ketamine, and was like, then I also similarly got into Terence McKenna. I would like do ketamine at the library and read like Terence McKenna books and all these like weird kind of psychedelic psychonaut authors. And, yeah, I mean, eventually it just didn't really work for me anymore. And it was actually kind of a little bit hard to get back then, to be honest. Like you could easily get like all the other drugs, but it was a little bit more, I guess the word, I don't know what the word I'm looking for. It was just basically hard to find somebody who had ketamine. So from that point on, I actually just went through a bit of a downward spiral and ended up getting addicted to far worser drugs, mainly like things like Xanax and opiates, prescription opiates, and that obviously wasn't going to work out well for very long. And then I remembered this ketamine experience, and then I started doing some research on it, and I found out something interesting, which that the reason that ketamine provides this immediate relief for depression is it shuts off this thing called the NMDA receptor, and that's responsible for linking current memories that you're experiencing in the present to previous experiences. And a lot of the patterns of depression are kind of getting stuck in this negative mindset and being like the thing that you're experiencing in the present, you start attaching it to past previous bad experiences. And so that's why it's so immediately effective. So, and it's also been used as a treatment for opiate addiction. So once again, I self-medicated myself, and I actually pulled myself out of a very pretty epic addiction to opiates by using it as a transitionary thing. And just a disclaimer again, I also had to do a lot of work on myself after. It kind of gave me a bit of a breather, I guess you could say. And then I had to really dive deep into my work. It didn't resolve any of my trauma. It just kind of pushed me. It gave me a little bit of a head start. So that was my first kind of positive experience. But also at the same time, like I can see how it almost gave me like a cheat code that didn't exist. Like I still had to deal with all my thought patterns. I still had to deal with all the trauma in my body. It just kind of gave me a little bit of a relief from the sadness and the depression that I had been experiencing for so long.
So do you feel with ketamine, you used it more as a tool and not to avoid or buffer things up, but it helped you to manage?
Yeah. For definitely. I mean, I think in the first instance, when I was first introduced to it, I was also looking for just relief from my depression. But then I was also, partying. I didn't really care about doing excess amounts. And then the second time that I used it more consciously, because I did some research on it, I was like, okay, I'm going to use this. I'm not going to I definitely wasn't doing it in any party setting. And I was doing it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to use this for a couple of weeks to get myself over this hump, because if anyone's listening and has experience with this, opiate addiction is extremely hard on the body and the brain too. It definitely depletes a lot of the neurotransmitters in the brain, depletes the dopamine. So it kind of gave me, I was basically, my intention was to use it in the same way that people use antidepressants, except to have to use it for a much shorter period. Whereas antidepressants, it takes about 6 to 8 weeks to kick in, at least. And that's if you're using the quote unquote right antidepressant. But here I was like 2 weeks of using it. And then I was able to kind of have a fresh mind in order to do the deeper work that I needed to do to heal those traumas.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, ketamine is like in a class in its own, and it's somewhat a psychedelic, but more of a dissociative as well. It's used in anesthetics, especially in veterinarian clinics, veterinarian clinic, excuse me. I actually used to work in an animal hospital and was actually a tech in surgery. And
you were the friend that I always was hoping to have.
Exactly.
When I was
People always hitting up, can you get me some ketamine? Can you get me some ketamine? But it's interesting. I also had my own ketamine experiences differently than yours, because I was back then really, I would call myself a psychonaut and really experimenting and diving deep. And I got into John Lilly's work.
Yeah, I did too, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I definitely pushed the limits. I was also taking it intramuscularly as well, and because I just had the strongest effect.
Exactly, that's what I did it once. I injected myself,
and that's when it got scary too.
I got myself into the so-called K-hole.
Oh yeah, I loved that place though.
That was my favorite experience.
That's interesting though that you say that was terrifying, because the reason that I got so attached to it is because I've only had these experiences on ketamine, and also when I had a very high fever when I was a kid, where I would literally K-hole or had a high fever when I was a kid, and I would touch God. There was a total all-encompassing experience of God. And that's what made me believe that God exists, is because I was like, oh my God, I felt it.
Yeah.
So I never, I don't know, maybe we had different types of ketamine, but I never had those scary K-hole experience. Or maybe I just didn't like being in my body in general. So I was like, this is awesome.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I was really doing research. I still have the folder. I did some research and printed out from the internet of how to induce near-death experiences via ketamine.
You wrote that yourself?
No, I just did research on the internet. I printed it out I did it all by myself too. It was a bit crazy. I mean, similar to you, I did a lot of things back then in my naivete, which I wouldn't do nowadays. And I'm kind of glad I came out fine, or out the other way, right? But
I was actually also... Because by then I had been to a psychiatric clinic where they used to practice MK Ultra experiments. Not that they practiced on me, but I was just aware of it, even though I hadn't really gotten into that kind of information. And I remember using it to intentionally brainwash myself too. I would put on positive thinking mantras and K-hole myself. I was doing all sorts of crazy things because I was literally just aggressively trying to brainwash myself.
Yeah. Wow. So... yeah, going back to some of, for me, and I can definitely say that psilocybin mushroom has been an ally in my early days. Like I mentioned before, it helped me to reveal a lot of childhood wounding, issues from my parents, and just, connect to something deeper within myself, to experience more life on a more energetic level, understanding, the body-mind connection, and, because I was suffering from very low self-esteem and all of that. So it definitely had its healing potential, but as I was pushing myself with high doses of mushrooms, what I also started to experience was very strange worlds with, entities or elves, as Terence McKenna said, and I always felt there's another intelligence, and it was not a projection of my unconscious or anything like that, but being confronted with entities, with beings, right? Some even reptilian in nature, and which I didn't have no context back then. But it was really fascinating, because I always assumed that people had, talked about they have this spiritual experience, which I had on some level too, but for the most part, it was a very alien experience for me. And that was also, in the sense, the introduction for me to, to the topic of UFOs, aliens, the hyperdimensional matrix and hyperdimensional realities, and all of that.
Yeah, I feel each plant, obviously, for most people who are somewhat interested in shamanism, has a spirit in itself. But ketamine is not a plant. I think it's an alien energy myself. And then mushrooms is definitely more of an elf energy, for sure. It's a direct association in all the kind of elf art you see these days. But for me, actually, I don't know. It's interesting. I've only had heart opening experiences on mushrooms. I've never had a bad mushroom trip. The only time it was too overwhelming. It was almost too much of a heart opening, and I was scared to open my heart that much.
Yeah, it was beautiful. I think, though, I remember that one incident where really the mushroom kicked my ass, and that's when I stopped doing psychedelics for many years. There was an experience out again in the desert, and I was so comfortable doing mushrooms and with my two of my friends, and we were pushing each other. Ego came into play, how much we could take. I remember sitting in the van where the music was blasting, and we the three of us, we each took about 7 to 8 grams, like a quarter of mushrooms each, right? And you remember all of a sudden, like something, it's always, you never know, some mushrooms also have a different potency and different qualities,
for sure, yeah.
right? And that mushrooms were like more toxic. And all three of us just in a nutshell had a death experience. I literally thought I'm going to die. Like it was horrible. Like my other friend, he was running around. I need help. I'm dying. And I was just all out of it. And me just, in my own fetal position. And I had this fear, okay, I'm going to die. And the guilt trip came up. And, thinking about my parents, they're going to find out I died of a drug overdose and all of that. But then through this death, I actually remember then this girl came by and she gave me this banana, and like I just ate it. And then the moment I ate it, kind of like everything changed, and I broke through it and had this rebirth, so to speak, this heart opening on a really high level. And I was literally seeing energy. It was plugged into this energetic matrix. I was dancing my ass off. It was amazing. But I also realized, okay, I have to treat these plants, these medicines with more respect. I cannot just use them for partying anymore. That was a huge wake-up call for me.
Yeah, and when you talk about that, the funny thing is I think my almost like suicidal death wish at the time was actually working to my benefit and being able to touch God, because I actually wasn't afraid to die when I was doing ketamine, because my life was already, it was so bad that I think I almost was trying, I still was fueled by that death wish, which is why I pushed myself, and I was willing to inject myself with stuff that I got from some random guy with dreadlocks down the street who I didn't know or trust. But, and I think it's mostly that fear that you get of death that is the barrier between you being able to reach these higher states. But let's maybe even just talk about I think even looking back, my main issue was that I wanted to feel good all the time, and I wasn't willing to actually feel as bad as I needed to feel in order to really do some deep processing, and that I really had to take a sober look at my life and all the ways that I had set it up and all the ways of being that I had been in the world, and really feel that and experience that instead of constantly trying to feel better or feel happy. I think that that's the thing in itself. It's what is it, 50% or something? Some really high number of the US is on antidepressants right now, and people put their dogs on antidepressants. And I think it's also symptomatic of how in the West, you're expected to be happy all the time and just smile and push through it and not really truly express how you're feeling. And I think even with psychedelics, it's we're trying to force this inauthentic state, when maybe this, the state of the world is causing these feelings in us for a reason. And we're living in a world that is uncomfortable, and we need to really feel that so we can create positive changes in our own lives and in the world. Yeah,
I can relate to that as well. At some point, I was also chasing that experience, right, of just wanting to feel this aliveness and, also visually, I just was addicted to the visions I got, and just these, out-of-body experiences, and just this bliss and love and all of that. And then I also got into, in the late 90s, heavily into DMT, which is really probably the strongest psychedelic out there. You can, in smokable form. And that kind of is, you enter in a whole different world with all kinds of being entities, but it was also extremely heart opening. I also did 5-MeO DMT, which is a really profound experience. It's a bit different than regular DMT, so to speak. But I was doing it a lot. I think I had 30 DMT trips within a couple of years. But again, like I mentioned before, similar to what you mentioned, too much was coming up too fast. I wasn't able to integrate, and wanted to have more disturbing experiences. Disturbing experience in the sense of dealing also with this hyperdimensional matrix, which I just got into back then, these entities and interferences. I'm sure I took something on back then in terms of entity attachment, a topic we'll get into a bit later in this podcast as well. But I realized, okay, I need to focus on all these issues more in a sober, grounded, constructive way. So it actually inspired me to learn more about basic psychology. I got into Jungian psychology, shadow work, basic spirituality. I learned, also just practicing yoga, meditation, and really integrate these experiences and work on it on a sober level, without trying to use these substances to basically bypass. Sometimes I feel, looking back, I have to also acknowledge myself, some of the experiences I was projecting too much positivity, so to speak, into these experiences than they actually were. You know what I mean? Overestimating myself, feeling, oh, I feel this now and all that, but it was still not healed. It's just like it showed me what is possible, so to speak. But the work to be done, even Terence McKenna said, it's not what you do on these substances or plants, but what you do when you're off of them. Truly integrate them and then do the work in a sober state.
Yeah, I found the most effective weeks for me, or times for me, were after doing ketamine. I got this like kind of 2-week break of relief where I wasn't in my own depressive patterns, and that's when I could really take on new ideas and learn new ways of being in the world. But when I was on it, it actually definitely wasn't fun. Like I was throwing up and like I was dizzy. I didn't have any equilibrium in my body. Like I was not functional at all. And so maybe, and it's interesting too, because looking back, like even, that attitude of always wanting to feel this amazing spiritual experience, it actually carried over into my own meditation practice. Cause I kind of had a little bit more of a background in psychology to some extent, cause my mom works in psychiatry. So I was very much around this kind of way of thinking my whole life, but I really didn't get into the spiritual components of life until I really hit my Saturn return, which happened around age 28. And I realized too, because of my experiences with psychedelics, I feel like they kind of gave me a shortcut. That's also an escape. That's also what I was trying to apply to my own meditation practice. So I would meditate, and I was really trying to get these, like, I thought the feelings of bliss and love were like that was the point of the spiritual journey. And I think it's like that idea of just chasing peak experiences in general really needed to get taken out of my mind as part of the spiritual journey and integrated into something more whole.
Yeah. And also back then, especially when I started out in the 90s and early 2000s, it was, like you mentioned before, it was not very popular at all. Hardly anybody I knew know anything about DMT or ayahuasca, which has become very popular in this day and age, right? It's very hyped as well. And, everybody's looking for ayahuasca retreats down in Peru, or, there's a lot of emphasis on the positive side of these plants and being used for healing. And I think that's very encouraging to see. Absolutely. Right. But there's also a blind spot in all of that, because I feel I've experienced for myself and worked with many others in my research that there are dangers to varying degrees. Right. And these dangers are not necessarily physical, but maybe from an energetic level, but even from a psychological level, people who are, like you mentioned in the beginning, set and setting. Where are you doing this? What are you doing? What's surrounding? Who is around you? And all of these, who is influencing you during this journey? And then sometimes it can make things worse, especially people who are dealing with severe trauma that's all of a sudden coming out, and they have no place to integrate it, nobody to guide them, and all of that.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of two stories. When I got into ayahuasca in maybe the peak hype moment, which was a couple years ago. And I had decided, I actually had a very positive experience. I did my first ayahuasca ceremony in LA with a shaman that I just randomly met on a movie set. I really liked her energy. I trusted it. And that was amazing. I went through all these, similar to how you describe your mushroom experience, like all these traumas came up. I was able to finally cry about things that were previously completely inaccessible to me. Like I was emotionally shut down into feeling that, and it brought it all up. The entire ceremony I cried. I must have been kind of annoying to the people around me looking back. But anyway, so I went down to Peru, and right before I went down, I was talking to this guy, and he was like, oh my God, like, please don't do it. My best friend went down there, and when he came back to the regular world, he basically couldn't handle it, and he killed himself. He shot himself like a couple months later. So that was like my kind of warning, and that was a true story. That was his best friend, and he was really trying to caution me against it. And then another experience I found out after I'd gone to Peru is a guy who was friends of a friend of mine. He basically lived on the same kind of area of Canada that I lived, and he knew people I knew. And he had a history of like drug addiction and aggression from what I've read. I didn't know him personally, so just a disclaimer. I'm obviously not going to say his name, but the details might give it away. But anyway, he went down, he was working with a very famous shaman grandmother down there, and apparently he had a psychotic break. He had a history of like drug addiction before, and maybe you can talk about how that can affect people. And he ended up killing her, murdering her, and then they lynched him in front. The village lynched him.
Oh, that just happened recently.
Yeah,
right?
that just happened.
What was her name?
Yeah,
I forgot. Yeah,
I won't name his name, but the details are going to give it away.
But what the shamans did.
Olivia.
She was very popular.
Yeah, she's very much like almost the face of ayahuasca in Peru. Like she's worked with Temple of the Way of Light, and that's Gabor Mate's ayahuasca healing center down there. But anyway, looking back, you can almost see how he was trying to kind of escape all these traumas of his past and almost take a bypass. That's just my own perspective on it. And then something came back to haunt him, and something came up in these ceremonies. And so I think that's also the danger of, I think a lot of people too are trying to look for a shortcut out of like, especially when they've had very traumatic past and drug addictions. And then in trying to find that shortcut, it's almost this weird paradox, because it always gets better before it gets worse. But if it gets way worse and you're not able to handle that point when it gets way worse, something like that could happen. Yeah.
And also, let's talk a bit about ayahuasca in particular, because that's very, very popular in this day and age again. My first ayahuasca experience, my first time in Peru, was in 2006. I went there with the yoga teacher I was working with, and she had a yoga retreat with ayahuasca ceremonies in the Sacred Valley. And I had a couple of ceremonies there with a pretty well-known shaman down there. And they went well, but also like the setup was just, the group of us, maybe 15 people. And it was interesting, my first experience also within a group, which I not have been used. I did a lot of my own experience of mushrooms, DMT, was mostly by myself or with one or two friends. So processing with a whole group of people was a whole new experience. And a lot of these people have never done any psychedelics or not even smoked cannabis before. So a lot of them actually, it was intense. Some of them freaked out. They ran out of the teepee. And I thought that's what happens. And this quote unquote shaman, I won't mention his name, he's very popular down there right now.
Yes, I think I've worked with him also.
Yes. He was just sitting there with his guitar playing, but not giving any individual attention. And I noticed like my good Peruvian friend Fred, whom I hosted a retreat in the past, he's known, he's just, it's like being on the ship, but nobody's steering the ship. Right.
That's his style too. He's like, his reasoning is it'll make you stronger if you can get through this on your own.
Oh, holy shit. Yeah. But, then I met this medicine woman there, which I became really close to, and she saw also the danger, and she's very psychic clairvoyant, and she saw even, somebody was processing, and then this entity, demon, whatever, ejected out of his aura and jumped into the person next to him. Right. And the quote unquote shaman was not aware of it at all. And I realized the danger of nowadays, because when you join these, sometimes these retreats, especially when they are just based on medicine plan, where you do like ayahuasca every 2 days or wachuma and just that, you come together.
And like 5 times in 10 days they'll do.
That's insane and crazy. And especially with people that come from all over the world, you don't know them. And sometimes, maybe a smaller circle, 10 people, but it can be up to 15, 20, 30. Then nowadays they even ceremonies are 80 and 100 people.
Yeah, I've heard of people.
That's crazy energetically.
Yeah, which is interesting because before I went down to Peru, I kind of had a few friends who kind of helped guide me, who were more aware of these energies. I didn't understand like the language for it, but I also knew that it was very important to work with psychic protection and prayer and intention before, because I went into those ceremonies, that same shaman, and it was like on a full moon, 50 people there. And that was crazy. Like, that was really, the But I remember and this is before I really understood. I just really understood that there was a spiritual field around people that energies could attach to, and you could transfer it to other people. And I also knew that when you take psychedelics, you're in a very vulnerable state. So, and I don't know how much this really helped in the end, but I did go in with prayer and intention. I had this whole ritual of putting all these crystals around my bed, and I really wanted to create a field around me so that whenever I went into these ceremonies, I would be protected. And people just went in people would come in from drinking the night before and all sorts of things. So I could see that people had no sense of what they were getting themselves into. They were just like, oh, I'm going to go down to Peru and go to Machu Picchu and also do an ayahuasca ceremony, and not really realizing the full extent of it's an extremely powerful medicine. And I think that for the most part, unless someone has already grounded themselves in some spiritual practice, meaning meditation, yoga, qigong, whatever it is, and really done a certain amount of work on themselves, they shouldn't be diving right into it. That's only my personal opinion, because I don't think, especially in ceremonies like that, they literally just let you sleep in the space, and then you go home after, and then you're just left on your own.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So that ties also into what we see now increasingly in Peru. I've been there many times, 10 times, and not just for ayahuasca, but hosting retreats myself then, not just with medicine plants, but the romanticizing of Peru, the romanticizing of shamanism, or the guru, but also India happens with guru projections, and what, gringos and white people project into the shaman, put them on a pedestal. Mm-hmm. And that was for me a wake-up call the last time I did ayahuasca down there, and I stopped since then in 2013. Two of my friends, one of them, my Peruvian friend, who is actually a Huachuma curandero working with San Pedro cactus, we went deep into the lower jungle, 8 hours on a banana boat to a Shipibo tribe and working with the shaman. But it was a very different ceremony, because it was just myself, my two friends, and then two shamans, very intimate setting. And I feel that's also more the traditional way. Right? Yeah. You just work almost one-on-one, or even the shaman only drinks, and not just with these groups of strangers. But what I've noticed, two things was interesting. That's when I was first confronted with hyperdimensional interference, in a very obvious one, because something happened during the ceremony. So I was processing, the shaman really gave me personal attention, helped me process, purge, and all of that. And then he worked with my other two friends, and then he started heavily processing and purging, and it was under a lot of distress, and his colleague, the other shaman, supported him in that. And I just thought, okay, this is his process. Maybe he's clearing himself from what he worked with us and all of that. But then his friend asked us to leave, and then we went to our own, tents and just processing our own experience, which, by the way, was more purging, was not too much vision. On that note, I also noticed that shaman we talked about, other shamans, they actually, the traditional use is actually more ayahuasca, in the sense of just la purga, the purge, and it's not about the visions, but now they know that the Westerners, as they say, like the fireworks. So they mix even other stuff in datura to increase the visuals, because that's what the Westerners like. Yeah. Right? But let me just finish that experience. So, the next day, we talked to the curandero, the shaman guided us, and he then told us that he was under attack from a neighboring shaman, right? Hyperdimensional psychic attack, because he was jealous and envious that he was working with us.
That's how they fight, by the way. It's pretty funny.
It's a sorcery, but it's very serious, because that's when I realized that there's dark shamanism, and these plants being used to put curses on other people, and especially on gringos. And there's something that, that many people are simply not aware of. And also, what I've noticed, a lot of, not all, but there's a lot of quote unquote shamans out of integrity, because they become greedy. They understand, the Westerners like this, there's money to be made, the almighty dollar. A lot of money, right? So we've noticed that a lot, especially there. So it was unavoidable to see this and confront that, right? So, so there are these dangers which a lot of people are not aware of. So it's really, like somebody said, whenever you do ayahuasca and these medicine plants with the shaman, it's like you're doing surgery. You have to know your surgeon. It's like psychic surgery. Who is this person? Is he or she in integrity? Like you mentioned before, a lot of these shamans are actually, especially down there, and alcohol is a problem. A lot of shamans drink alcohol. And there have been many incidents of abuse, even sexual abuse, rape, and suicides. All of that is under the influence of ayahuasca being swept under the rug or just ignored by the quote unquote medicine community because it's bad for business, so to speak. And again, it's not about throwing out the baby with the bathwater, but there needs to be an awareness around how the popularity has created a lot of abuse and distortion of the medicine world.
Yeah, which is interesting because just looking back, my most effective ayahuasca ceremony was with a woman from Detroit, and not the shamans in Peru who I were meeting. I could just sense that greed, and I could see that they saw me as just another Westerner to make money from. And it's really about the energy of the person and the integrity of the person. And she, she obviously, not obviously, but she went through her own initiation. I'm not saying she was just some random person who just did ayahuasca and was like, I'm going to start having ayahuasca ceremonies, which is a lot of the Western ayahuasca. They call themselves shamans, but I don't think they are. So there's a lot of that, but just the fact that she was able to hold the space, she was in integrity, and she had the right values behind it, and she wasn't fueled by greed, I think was the most important thing, because the person who's facilitating the ceremony, that's the person who's really, controlling the energy in the room in many ways. Like that's why they sing the Icaros and they have the music and stuff, is because they're trying to create the energy in the room and protect the energy in the room from those things happening. And then down in Peru, it's crazy, the ayahuasca tourism. I mean, I'm sure you went, I guess, a couple years last before I went, but it's just, you see the greed in their eyes, and you just can tell, like, anytime, I mean, it's the same in India, but maybe in a different way. But if you're a Westerner, they just see you as dollar signs. So I think that once you start mixing any sort of spiritual work with greed, it automatically just ruins the integrity of it.
Yeah, and that ties really into the much bigger topic of the matrix control system, because what I've realized myself in the past, like I mentioned, I've definitely taken on some entity attachments from working with mushrooms and and interferences in particular, and that has increased in this day and age. And then my article I wrote last year called Altered States of Entrapment, I share a case of this kid from Canada who in his early 20s looked up an ayahuasca retreat on the internet and joined it, and was one of these well-known shaman down in Iquitos, and did the typical, was it 5 ceremonies in 10 days or something. And they were mixing too, which is unheard of in traditional shamanism, 3 days of ayahuasca, then you do wachuma and then DMT on top of it. Was like, my friend talked, like a psychedelic candy store, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right. And it's very irresponsible, but just because people get hooked on these peak experience, and something very disturbing happened there, where he actually got cursed by the shaman, putting a curse on. The way it works is similar, like Western, let's take an analogy, Western medicine, doctor's malpractice, where he keeps, the client or the patient sick, so he comes back for more.
That's actually common. That's not even considered malpractice at this point.
Just put them on drugs. But the similar, he actually attached an entity into him to at first, give him the illusion that something has been healed and better, but kept him coming back for more. So it got him even more sick, but something went even terribly wrong, and he was dealing with the intense demonic possession, literally. And he came back to Canada and literally lost his mind. He lost his work, his own business. He tried to commit suicide, driven by this entity. I have all this whole case is described in my article. You guys can read it up. And he actually had to escape to Mexico because he was getting institutionalized under heavy medication, but his girlfriend helped him to get off of it, and then they fled literally to Mexico to find help. And then he came across my work. My older article talked about reflection ayahuasca, where I already shared about dark shamanism, and we had a Skype session. And during the Skype session already, the entity always was taking him over, really literally choking him. He made these weird mudras with his hands and had a hard time sharing to step in his power. And he was injected with these thoughts by these entities that he's powerless, that he's just a puppet, and all of that. So that was a few years back, and I worked with him for a month, and he has gone through an amazing healing journey and got himself out of it. But it was just, it's a good example of how dangerous it sometimes can be. And I want to make clear, this is not about fear mongering, right? It's not implying that this happens with any ceremony you can get into, but it's just about awareness, right? And not have these romantic projections. I was understanding, not to chase these experiences, especially in my case. And I was never really like looking for them. It just came across my path. And nowadays people, through group pressure, peer pressure, and now they're so hyped. It's like, oh, I have to try ayahuasca. It's so popular.
Google,
I need to, they just forcefully look for it.
Yeah.
Right. And that's how you get yourselves into these traps. And I was understanding from from this path of healing and awakening, it's not necessary to work with these plants. It's just another path, right? It can help to a certain degree, but also understanding these are tools, and at a certain point, these tools need to be laid aside.
Yeah, and I remember, I forget, as a first person, like I could see myself being led towards it, because right after I had my first, like, I guess, awakening experience, it was an intense healing journey, doing yoga and meditation every day, and I ended up working with a guy who did ayahuasca, and he actually had a very nice energy. He was one of the first people who I felt demonstrated true, like, loving kindness and compassion to me after all these years of trauma, and he just came back from doing ayahuasca, and then I was like, oh, that's interesting, and it kind of intrigued me, I guess you could say. And then I just ended up working on this movie set with the shaman who did ayahuasca ceremony. So it was very much a synchronicity. And then when I went to go seeking more of it in Peru, I feel like that's when it kind of went wrong in a sense, like, because I feel like it's almost like, with that seeking energy, when you're trying to look for something, you're trying to force something as well. And you should also kind of let the right teachings and teachers and mentors come across your path, rather than just Googling like best ayahuasca shaman and then going to go see them. I also had, like, it's not to say that I didn't have amazing experiences on ayahuasca when I was in Peru, but my main intention, interestingly, was actually, I understood like that there was an interdimensional world that affected our physical reality. And my intention was I wanted to see more of that. And I really wanted to understand that. And I would go into each ceremony with a specific intention. Like I was reading books at the time about shamanism. I'd be like, okay, I want to see like the field that's around people and how it affects people. And when I went in that intention, often actually, to my surprise, the medicine plant would work with me in my intention. But then there were other times when it got very confusing and hijacked. Like we had alien interferences in one ayahuasca ceremony, for instance, where even the shaman was like talking to the aliens that were in the room. We had other people who were channeling alien languages in it. There was flashes of light outside of a place where we were having the ceremonies, and I don't even remember that ceremony very much, or nothing came up for me personally in that ceremony, because I had literally left my body. It was so intense, and like people were throwing up way more than usual. It was like the frequency was crazy, and it wasn't a great frequency at all. It was just very distorted. So that I could see that, my the negative experiences looking back, even though I didn't know that they were negative at the time, far outweighed the positive ones. And I call them negative because they got me very ungrounded and very confused about reality. And when I came back to the normal world, much like these kind of horror stories I was talking about before, I didn't even know how to integrate them into reality. And I was like, okay, I need to leave this alone for a while.
Yeah. That's a huge topic you just mentioned, which you made me aware of, because I was completely done with the whole ayahuasca scene, so to speak, and even like the whole alien agenda and the UFO phenomena, which is all a topic on its own, right? And I made a documentary about the UFOs, aliens, and the question of contact, that the phenomena is not what most people think it is, and especially the New Age still buys into the space brothers are here to save us, the Galactic Federation of Light, not understanding the hyperdimensional matrix and how most often negative forces appear as positive ones. And then when you told me that people down there now use ayahuasca ceremonies to literally have conscious contact with alien beings, channel them, even you told me it ties into the hybridization program, that people think it's a good thing that these alien entities, grays or whatever they may be, basically fuck with our genetics. Engage in its breeding program is good for humanity, and there's this whole deception. It's extremely disturbing. And then I realized in this day and age, it has more heightened, and because of the hype and the popularity of ayahuasca medicine plants, the matrix control system is in overdrive and uses that as a portal for more control, for more attachment and interferences, but can manipulate in a lot of these visions. That's what I realized too. As I mentioned before, like I feel sometimes in my past, I've overestimated myself and made more of these experiences and vision than they actually were, because I wanted them to be amazing and profound. And then ego came into play, who hijacks these experiences when, you feed off of that, that you're special or anything like that.
And then everyone comes back and they want to share their amazing ayahuasca experience. It shows how enlightened they are.
Exactly, And then these, many people have visions of different, archangels or gods, but they can be very manipulative and ties into so-called trap of agreement, where you make an agreement with these hostile beings. But most often, as it's written in esoteric teachings, most often angel or Satan appears as an angel of light. And that reminds me of, I want to just quote this real quick from my article, a quote by Lisa Renee. I can recommend her work, energysynthesis.com is her website. And she nails it here. She says, ayahuasca, other ceremonial shamanic plants, and psychedelic drugs are high-risk behaviors that initiate attachments, addiction webbing, and possession for human beings on the planet during the ascension cycle at this time. Ayahuasca plant spirit has been hijacked by many of the dark avatars and the consortium of the NAA, the negative alien agenda entities, basically called hostile forces of the hyperdimensional matrix, that are on this planet during the ascension cycle looking to harvest soul bodies and the possibility to take over the physical body. It is designed to interfere with true spiritual communication links and shut off the neurological communication functions between the person's consciousness and the higher spirit. It will install its own software programs to run the body and brain in the autonomic functions of the central nervous system. It is usually an astral enlightenment program to trick the person into believing their artificially induced spiritual and altered consciousness state is real. The ayahuasca plant is connected to a massive spirit that has grown in size from many people being falsely led on this path and taking it at high quantities during this time. The design of this plant ceremony, in most common cases, is that the spirit of the plant is manipulated by negative forces that want the original consciousness of the person taking the drug to leave the body and or change timelines. The goal for the imposter spirit that want to take over the human body either in the current time or in the future timelines uses the ayahuasca plant to act as a conduit and dark portal opening to allow access into the inner spiritual sanctum of that person. Now, the really important part of that quote is this, what she mentions, this enlightenment, installing this astral enlightenment program to trick the person into believing the artificial induced spiritual and altered consciousness state is real. So that's, people feel they have been awoken, have these enlightening experiences, but they can, she said, these faux enlightenment experiences, which actually the esoteric teachings, the occult teachings also warn about, the mystical phenomena that are sidetracked but are not considered the true awakening experience.
Yeah, exactly. And even that idea, like when we're on this awakening path, there's going to be several junctures where we're going to try, where these forces are going to try and derail us from our true soul purpose. And I think looking back on my own experiences, it was a derailment. Like if I would have just kept up my practice, doing yoga, meditation, working on my stuff that came up, it would have helped. I think well, who knows what would have happened, but I think that would have been more productive for my own spiritual growth. Because I basically had more work to do because of stuff that happened in the ayahuasca ceremony after. So that was a kind of a bit of a red flag. And then I realized like it actually, everything can be used as a lesson looking back. That's what truly committed me to my meditation practice. Because I was like, oh my God, there are no shortcuts. I need to, not just even meditate, because you can also use meditate as a way of spiritually bypassing, but meditate and allow my mind to kind of calm down, see what comes up in my body, and then work with that. And that there wasn't going to be just suddenly I take a drink of a plant medicine and all my traumas go away. I think that's the issue, is that thinking that there is any sort of shortcut on this journey. And then through our own laziness, that's when we can easily get derailed by stuff like ayahuasca, because people just don't want to do like the really hard work. They just don't want to sit with their feelings. They just want to take a drink or take mushrooms and then suddenly they feel better. But the fact of the matter is like all this trauma as you experienced in your mushroom ceremonies is in your body, and you're going to have to heal that through your own presence. And creating an out of body experience is going to leave you less present than before for the most part. I know a lot of people who do ayahuasca regularly, and I don't know anyone who it's truly made into an enlightened being. And if ayahuasca is such a powerful medicine, then how come we don't have more people who are enlightened from ayahuasca?
That's on a good, two things that come to mind when you share this also relates to what you said at the beginning. Like, again, we're not telling people what they should be doing. Personally, my own process, what I've realized, doing any forms of psychedelics, medicine plants actually is detrimental to my own embodiment practice. It's actually counterproductive.
It's very draining on the physical body too.
Yeah, and energetic. And I noticed that because, as some people know, follow my work, I host retreats in Peru in the high jungle, which also Laura and I are going to host another retreat that's coming June. But we're working without medicine plants. In the past, I used to work with medicine plants, in particular Wachuma San Pedro cactus with my Peruvian friend. He's a Wachuma curandero. But also the program we designed was back then, we had like a 10-day program or 9-day program. And we had like a whole preparation phase and embodiment practices, psychological work. And then literally out this 10 days, just 1 day a ceremony. And then the rest 3-4 days integration, right? But even within that, we realized then years into it, like we wanted to stop working with it because we realized people were so just focused on the medicine plant. That's what they wanted so badly. And people had amazing experiences, don't get me wrong, healing experiences. It was beautiful. What we noticed is similar to what you said at the beginning. Most people still lack the foundation on a very basic level. If you want to, if you feel drawn to the path of medicine plants, I can highly recommend to have already in somewhat consistent meditation practice, embodiment practice, spiritual practice, also have done a certain amount of psychological work, even, basic understanding of Jungian psychology, childhood wounding, how to process that, right? And all of that, and before you can, enter that kind of domain. And also on top of it, it's especially, when you're entering other dimensions of these plants, have an understanding of the hyperdimensional matrix, the occult forces, how deceptive they can, how to navigate these realms of understanding before you just enter these jungles. Because even it's written in the esoteric teachings, there's jungles out there in the unseen realms. They're far more dangerous than any physical jungles out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And also, the funny thing is no matter how much psychic awareness you also have, once you're in that state, I think you have to be you have to be a very powerful sorcerer to even navigate that. Because even with my own level of I didn't have a deep level, but I feel like, it's similar to almost when you can develop your meditation practice as much as you want, but then when you're in the world and the situation that drives you crazy, or maybe with your family, for instance, like how great is your meditation practice is going to be. So even though no matter how much awareness you gain before you go into these situations, you're kind of left it's extremely hard to navigate once you're in it as well. I think that's also the thing. And also, just as an incentive for people, what I've noticed is that the more that someone has done that foundational work, the less they're going to have these extremely horrific trips. Like the people who seem to have the most horrific experiences when I was in those ceremonies were the people who just seemed like they were partying and doing cocaine. Which leads me into a very interesting story, by the way. I actually knew a girl who I met in a meditation retreat who told me that she was crazy partying, doing tons of cocaine and alcohol before she went to the ayahuasca ceremony. And she drank the ayahuasca and nothing happened.
That reminds me of, I had a few ceremonies, there was a few individuals, there's one guy who had 2 or 3 cups and it didn't affect him at all. Was weird, and he had a weird energy. And that reminds me of something you mentioned before, because I was also in my romantic phase, we just need to, put LSD into the water supply and everybody will awaken, or if the world leaders would just eat mushrooms, or Bush or whatever, Obama take ayahuasca, they would have this enlightening experiences and would be amazing. But, you can only experience on your level of being and your soul potential. Mm-hmm. And that ties into the topic of soulless humans and organic portals. That not everybody is soul, but some people are just automated empty shells. so to speak, and don't have a little, that's a question of the soul. And this topic goes, people can check it out on my blog called Organic Portal, Soulless Humans. So when an individual like this takes a medicine plant, then indeed nothing happens. If a psychopath or sociopath out there, the world leaders, the world is run by psychopaths, and most aware people know that. If they drink ayahuasca or LSD, they won't have any enlightening experience. It would just not happen to them because they don't have that level of being in them already. It can only bring out what's already within you. So this whole romantic notion that everybody just needs to drink ayahuasca in order to make this world a better place is based on illusion and the assumption, again, which we talked about before, the assumption that we feel that, everybody is the same, right? That everybody has the same emotion, the same capabilities within themselves. But as it's written in esoteric scriptures, equality, there's no such thing as equality in an entire universe, and there are different levels of being, from, again, soulless to more soul individualized beings. So that's really important to understand from a more mature level, and having a more grounded understanding also of that kind of cosmology, I would say.
Yeah, and I guess my main lesson was that doing meditation and self-work in nature was far more effective to me than any of these ceremonies. And that's also why it's amazing too, because we kind of both reached these similar conclusions, and now we get to kind of use the practices that we've developed on our own and combine it into this retreat that we're going to be doing in Peru, and just give people these basic foundational skills and have them meditating in nature and going through these processes and this psychological self-work and understanding more of these realities as well. So it kind of creates a more grounded, I feel just speaking for myself, this will have a much more grounded impact on what will change, because it takes a few days from doing an ayahuasca or a psychedelic ceremony to come back down to earth and come back down in your body. That was a challenge for me. And if you're doing these practices and you're already in your body, then you're actually doing the work that needs to be done by transmuting these traumas and these things that we're holding on to. Like, it's all stored in the body. So it's interesting how these out of body experiences, if you're not in your body, then you're just going to come back into the same body with the same patterns and the same history, and you're going to have to deal with it.
Yeah. Again, on that retreat, just before we close up the hour here, this retreat will be in the Peruvian high jungle, June 3rd until June 9th. You can read up on my website under retreats and events. And it's also restricted only to 9 people. And, I've lost count. Literally anybody whom I tell that I host retreats in Peru says, "Oh, you're doing ayahuasca?" I'm like, no, we're not. We love the energy of the jungle. It's amazing just being in this powerful natural environment, brings stuff up already, but we're really focusing on embodiment practices, on meditation, but also give talks and workshops about various topics. Many of them we covered here, called forces, basic psychological work, also focus on right relationship and all of that, on, aligning with the soul purpose and all of that. And that's, the intention, what we realized through our own suffering and learning most often lessons the hard way, and many of them were just initiations, is also to give people a foundation and the tools they can apply on the everyday level when they come back.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I've gone deep into meditation. I have some extremely powerful meditations that can be applied. And these meditations also bring stuff up, but they'll bring stuff up in a way that's manageable as well. And also having people who've been through these experiences and can help guide you and support you emotionally is priceless. And I think that's the main thing that people are looking for. Like, they're looking to really find out like what they have that needs to be healed, have a greater understanding of the world, and then being able to bring that into the world in a grounded and practical way. So just a disclaimer, I don't know when this podcast is going to come out, but since we do have only 9 spaces, it also might be already filled up by then, but you're welcome to still go to the website and check out more details about that. So I'm really excited for it as well, because I've personally never been to the deep jungle, and I know how powerful it is to do these kind of practices in nature and itself. So yeah. Anything else we need to add? Yeah,
just generally keep in mind with the hype nowadays, a path is just a path, so to speak. There are many different paths, and the medicine path is just another path. It's not necessary to take any form of medicine plants or psychedelics to heal yourself, and sometimes it can help. Sometimes it can also make things worse. You never know. It's just really trusting more your inner guidance in that sense. But yeah, this finish the first hour, and we'll be talking in the second hour for the members. You can find the membership section on my website, veilofreality.com, to access the second hour of the podcast. And we go talk more about our personal experiences. There's definitely some very interesting DMT experiences I want to share with you guys that ties into the alien agenda. And we also talk about MK Ultra and the creation of the psychedelic and hippie movement and how that got already hijacked in the 60s and 70s. Timothy Leary and all of that. And, and we go a bit deeper into some of the topics we have discussed in the first hour as well. So talk to you then.